Life has a curious way of deceiving us, making us believe that everything is exactly where it should be. For years, I thought I had everything under control. Work, marriage, a planned future. But I was wrong. Very wrong. The alarm clock went off at 6 sharp, as always. The soft morning light filtered through the gaps in my bedroom curtains, bathing the room in a golden glow. I stretched, feeling the soft sheets against my skin, and turned my head to the side. The bed beside me was empty. Ricardo had already left. He always started his day before me. A meticulous routine that included the gym, a quick scan of emails, and a black coffee, no sugar. A discipline I admired but could never adopt for myself. My world worked differently. My day only began when I sat in front of my computer and dove into the graphs and reports of my company. A startup I built from scratch, defying all expectations and becoming a reference in the technology sector. The hot water from the shower slid over my shoulders as my thoughts aligned. Life was exactly as I wanted it. My marriage was going well. My company was thriving. Ricardo and I were talking more and more about the next step. Children. At breakfast, I sat at the marble table, analyzing some emails on my tablet while sipping my tea. That was when Claudia appeared. She walked into my house as if it were hers, which was no surprise anymore. The forced elegance of her designer clothes contrasted with the coldness in her eyes. "I brought croissants," she said, placing a bag on the table and sitting across from me without being invited. That was Claudia, always showing up unannounced, always imposing her presence, always smiling as if there was no poison in every word that left her mouth. "How thoughtful," I replied without lifting my eyes from the tablet. She leaned slightly forward, analyzing me with that calculating gaze. "Has Ricardo left for his trip yet?" The question was too casual. I slowly closed the tablet, watching her more closely. "Not yet. His flight is later this afternoon." She nodded, picking up a croissant and taking a small bite, as if she were there just for an innocent coffee. But I knew Claudia never did anything without a reason. She and Ricardo weren't particularly close. She only took an interest in him when it suited her. "And you? How are things at the company?" she asked, throwing a lazy glance at my screen. "Great. We grew 30% last quarter. We're expanding into new markets." "How impressive," she said, with a smile that never reached her eyes. I watched her in silence. Claudia once had everything, an empire of her own, money, influence. But she lost it all with bad investments, impulsive decisions, and uncontrollable ambition. She never knew how to handle failure, and her downfall only made her more bitter. She picked up her phone from the table and typed something quickly, as if she were anxious. Her gaze kept shifting from mine, and her leg was bouncing under the table. "You seem restless." She laughed, a sound too forced. "Just a little tired." A lie. Something was bothering her, and I knew Claudia never showed up without a reason. "Well, I have to go," she said, standing up and grabbing her purse in a hurry. "We'll talk later." She disappeared as quickly as she arrived, leaving behind a strong scent of sweet perfume and an unsettling feeling I couldn't shake. I picked up my phone and did something I had never done before. I accessed the security cameras of the house and replayed the footage from the previous night. Nothing seemed strange until I noticed one detail. Claudia had already been here. My documents had been rummaged through in the library, something I only noticed from the reflection of the light. And then, there she was, on the recording, going through something in the drawer of my office when she thought no one was watching. My heart tightened. Something was very wrong. I just didn't know that that night my world was about to turn upside down. I stared at my phone screen for a few seconds, trying to process what I was seeing. Claudia in my library, going through my documents. The reflection from the desk lamp revealed her restless hands shuffling through papers in the drawer, her eyes always alert to the door, as if she expected to be caught at any moment. But I wasn't there. I hadn't seen her that night. Blood rushed faster through my veins. I took a deep breath and replayed the footage, analyzing every detail. When she finally left the library, Claudia adjusted her dress, picked up her phone, and sent a message to someone. It took only a few seconds before she put the device away and disappeared from the camera's view. I pressed the pause button and leaned back in my chair. My mind was working fast. I knew Claudia was impulsive, but what could she have been looking for? My business documents were there, financial records, investment contracts. She had already gone bankrupt once. Was she trying another desperate move? I looked at the table and felt a chill down my spine. Over the past few days, small details had caught my attention. A bank statement that went missing and then reappeared folded differently. An email I was sure I had read but showed as unread when I accessed it again. Passwords I had to reset because they seemed incorrect. Someone was tampering with my information. Restlessness took hold of me. I grabbed my phone and called Ricardo, who was still at the office finishing the final preparations for his trip. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, love, everything okay?" "Yeah, I just wanted to ask. Have you mentioned anything about our investments to Claudia?" "Huh? No, of course not. Why?" "She was here, alone, and she went through my documents." The silence on the other end lasted longer than I would have liked. "Are you sure?" "I saw it on the recordings. I don't know what she was looking for, but I'm almost certain it wasn't anything good." Ricardo sighed. "Do you want me to cancel the trip?" The question lingered in the air, and the answer formed in my mind before I could even articulate it. If Ricardo stayed, Claudia would know I was suspicious. If he stayed, I would never find out what she was up to. "No," I replied. "Go. I'll handle it." "Are you sure?" "Yes. But be careful who you discuss our business with. Something tells me Claudia has plans, and I need to figure out what they are." I hung up and placed the phone on the table, staring at the now cold cup of tea beside me. If Claudia wanted something, she would try again, and I would be waiting. That night, I attended my mother-in-law's birthday dinner. A traditional event, too formal for my taste, but one I couldn't refuse. Elegant dress, discreet makeup, a polite smile for the photos. But my mind was elsewhere. Claudia arrived late. She wore a tight red dress, her hair impeccably tied in a bun. She greeted everyone with a wide, affectionate smile, as if nothing was wrong. But then, our eyes met, and for an instant, I saw a flicker of hesitation. She knew. She knew I had noticed something, and she was afraid I knew more than I actually did. I picked up my wine glass and walked through the room, observing everything around me. People talked, laughed, toasted. But then across the hall, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Claudia was talking to a man. Not just any man. The same man I had seen in the photos during my research that morning. Raul Nascimento. He wasn't wearing a suit or tie like the other guests. Just a dark shirt, the top buttons undone, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. A well-groomed beard and eyes that seemed heavy, dangerous. Claudia laughed at something he said, but her fingers trembled as she held her glass. Then, Raul lifted his eyes and saw me, and smiled, a cold smile. Calm. And at that moment I knew, whatever was happening had already begun. I just had no idea what was waiting for me. The dinner went as expected, at least for the other guests. For me, every detail felt distorted, every smile exaggerated, every laugh too loud. My eyes kept returning to Claudia and Raul. They remained on the outskirts of the crowd, talking in low tones, but I noticed their discreet glances in my direction. They knew I was watching. I left earlier than expected, claiming exhaustion. I drove home, with my mind racing, replaying every detail of the past few days. If Claudia was plotting something, she wasn't doing it alone. Raul was a key player, and he didn't seem like the type of man to get involved in small scams. Whatever they wanted, it was big. When I arrived home, the house was silent. Ricardo had already left for his trip. I went upstairs, changed into something more comfortable, and sat in front of my computer. I accessed my bank accounts and investment records, looking for any suspicious activity. Nothing. Whatever they were planning, they hadn't made a move yet. I closed the laptop and ran my hands over my face. I was exhausted, but an unsettling feeling kept me from resting. I glanced at the clock. Almost midnight. I got up and went to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water. The sound of ice clinking against the glass echoed in the quiet space. I took a deep breath, trying to push away the uneasiness that had followed me since the dinner. That's when I heard a noise. Faint, almost imperceptible. The sound of something being moved downstairs. My body froze. The glass was still in my hand when my eyes turned toward the kitchen door. Instinct told me to move, to run, to get out of there. But before I could react, I saw a shadow in the reflection of the window glass. The shock came before the pain. I felt the impact on the back of my head, as if a hammer had struck me, and my body lost all strength. The glass slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. The world spun, and then everything went dark. The last thing I heard before blacking out was a familiar voice, laced with irony and venom. "Good night, Cinderella." I woke up slowly, my body heavy, as if sinking into a dark ocean. My mouth was dry, and there was a bitter, metallic taste on my tongue. Gradually, my senses returned. The smell of dust and rust clung to the air. The floor beneath me was cold and hard, and my wrists burned. When I tried to move, I realized they were bound. Rough ropes tightened around my arms behind my back. Fear arrived before understanding. My head throbbed, my vision still blurry. But then I heard footsteps. I lifted my eyes, blinking to adjust to the darkness. A dim light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting distorted shadows across the space. The place looked like an abandoned warehouse. And in front of me, Claudia was, smiling. She was flawless as always, her hair styled in a perfect bun, makeup untouched, a tight dress that looked completely out of place in that filthy environment. Beside her, Raoul watched me with a cold, impatient gaze, as if evaluating how long it would take me to process the situation. Claudia stepped forward slowly, holding something between her fingers. When the dim light reflected off the object, my stomach turned. A pen. "Finally awake," she said, her voice sweet, almost amused. "We've been waiting." My mind was spinning, still trying to grasp reality. The pain at the back of my head throbbed, but adrenaline had already started surging through my veins. Raoul took a step closer, his eyes locked onto mine. He was even more menacing up close, an oppressive presence that seemed to consume all the space around him. "We need to settle a small issue," Claudia continued, twirling the pen in the air as if it were just a minor detail. "Nothing too complicated. I just need your signature." My breathing quickened, but I didn't let any panic show. My eyes drifted to the table beside them, where a stack of papers lay scattered. And then I understood everything. They were asset transfer documents. She wanted everything. My heart pounded against my ribs, but I kept my face blank. I let Claudia believe I was still dazed, that I hadn't fully grasped what was happening. She smiled, stepping even closer, lowering herself until our faces were inches apart. "You've always had everything so easy," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "But now it's time to share a little." She thought she had already won, but the game had only just begun. Claudia was still kneeling in front of me, holding the pen delicately between her fingers, as if offering me the solution to all my problems. But we both knew it was a death sentence. If I signed, I would lose everything. If I refused, Raoul would finish what he started. My gaze flickered to the papers on the table, my name printed in bold letters, followed by detailed clauses, asset transfer, full cession of ownership, a single signature, and my life would be stolen right before my eyes. I lifted my gaze to Claudia and saw the triumphant gleam in her expression. She was already savoring victory, waiting for me to surrender to fear. But fear was a luxury I couldn't afford at that moment. I blinked a few times, feigning disorientation. "If I sign, you'll let me go?" Raoul let out a low, gruff laugh, a sound laced with mockery. "Of course," he replied. "Sign it, and you disappear, alive and without any trouble. Refuse, and I start breaking your fingers one by one." The way he said it, so casually, as if discussing the weather, sent a chill down my spine. But I kept my expression neutral, as if I were considering the offer. I made a subtle movement with my wrists, testing the tightness of the ropes. The rough fibers bit into my skin. Claudia sighed, exasperated. "Come on, Laura. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. "You've already lost." Her eyes sparkled. She truly believed that I had no way out, that I was cornered. I smiled, low, just enough for her to notice. "Are you sure about that?" Claudia frowned. Her posture shifted slightly, as if, for a fleeting second, her certainty wavered. Raoul, however, did not like my reaction. He moved quickly, gripping my face tightly, his fingers digging into my jaw. "You're not in a position to act smart," he growled. And then it happened. The sound, faint, intermittent, but unmistakable, an electronic beep. Claudia's expression changed instantly. Confusion, then panic. "What the hell was that?" Raoul demanded, releasing my face. Claudia turned her head in all directions, searching for the source of the noise. Her sharp eyes settled on my wrist, my watch. She realized it. My smile widened just a little more. "That," I murmured, my voice slightly hoarse, "was the sound of your defeat." Claudia rushed to the warehouse window and pulled back a dirty tarp that covered the view. The moment she did, the color drained from her face. Raoul stormed toward her, and the rage in his expression confirmed what I already knew. The flashing blue and red lights illuminated the outside. They were surrounded. The police were already there. I had discreetly moved my wrist 3 times while being tied up, activating the alert on my smartwatch. A subtle but highly effective device. It sent a distress signal with my exact location, alerting the authorities without anyone noticing. And now it was too late for them. Claudia turned to me, her face contorted in fury and despair. "What did you do?" she screamed. Raoul yanked a gun from his belt, his eyes wild. "Tell me you have a plan to get us out of this." But Claudia didn't answer, because at that moment she finally understood what I had known all along. She was never in control. She was never in control. And now there was nothing she could do. I heard the sharp sound of the warehouse door being broken down. And then chaos erupted. The crash of the door being rammed open echoed through the warehouse like thunder. The metallic clang reverberated against the rusted walls, mixing with the shouts of command that filled the space. "Police! Nobody move!" Flashlights cut through the darkness, and the pounding of heavy boots flooded the air. Raoul spun around in a swift motion, raising his gun. His face twisted into a primal expression, his wild eyes searching for an escape. Claudia froze. For a second, everything stopped. The rapid breaths, the sweat trickling down the side of my face, the ropes still tight around my wrists. I could feel my own heart hammering inside my chest. But there was something else, something growing inside me. It was the certainty that I had won. The first shot came fast, a sharp crack slicing through the air. Raoul reacted before anyone could think, firing at the police in a desperate act. The gunshot made Claudia scream, covering her ears, her eyes wide with fear for the first time. That night, the world spiraled into chaos. The officers advanced, their commands escalating. Raoul tried to run, fired another shot, but he was taken down before he could reach the exit. I saw him drop to his knees, his revolver slipping from his fingers before it was kicked far from his reach. His face hit the concrete floor with a dull thud. It was quick. It was brutal. It was exactly what he deserved. Claudia took a step back, her lips trembling. She looked at me, at the police, at the exit. There was nowhere left to run. Then, as if something inside her had finally snapped, her expression changed. Fear gave way to rage. She lunged at me. My hands were still tied, and for a moment, panic surged in my throat as I saw her fingers wrap around my neck. "This is your fault," she screamed, her voice shrill with hysteria. Her eyes were bloodshot, her nails digging into my skin as she shoved me back against the chair, choking me. The weight of her desperation was as suffocating as her grip. The force of her fury was the reflection of her failure. But it wasn't enough. The police yanked her off me, forcing her to the ground. As she thrashed and screamed like a caged animal, "Let me go! She provoked me! She did this to me!" Her voice echoed through the warehouse, but no one cared. No one listened to Claudia anymore. She had lost. She had no power left. I gasped for air, coughing as one of the officers knelt beside me and cut the ropes from my wrists. My skin was raw, red, but I didn't care. I was free. I lowered my gaze to where Claudia writhed on the ground, fighting against the handcuffs locked around her wrists. Her face was contorted in pure hatred. She hated me. She hated me because she had lost. I swallowed hard, my voice raspy, as I whispered the last thing she would ever hear from me. "Good night, Cinderella." Her eyes widened, and then she was dragged out of the warehouse, kicking, screaming, but with no one left to hear her. The air felt lighter when the door slammed shut behind her. And for the first time that night, I smiled. I had won. But it wasn't over yet. The walk out of the warehouse felt longer than it really was. The stench of rust and dust still clung to my nose, and my skin was sticky with sweat and adrenaline. But with each step, reality became clearer. It was ending. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped onto the dry earth outside. The flashing lights of police vehicles cast eerie glows across the wreckage of this failed scheme. Claudia was pressed against one of the police cars, her wrists bound, her makeup smeared, her hair disheveled. For the first time, she looked human, small, fragile. But the fury was still there. When she saw me, her body tensed. "I should have killed you when I had the chance," she snarled, her voice dripping with bitterness. The officers ignored her, continuing their arrest protocol. One of them read her rights in a firm, impersonal tone. But Claudia heard none of it. Her eyes were locked on mine, burning with a hatred that would never fade. Raoul was already gone. He didn't fight. He didn't curse. He didn't threaten. He simply bowed his head and accepted his fate, knowing it was inevitable. But Claudia, she still couldn't accept that the game was over. The officers stepped aside, and for a brief moment, it was just her and me. "You ruined everything," she spat, her hands clenching into fists. "I would have won. I deserved it." I took a step closer, my voice unwavering. "You never deserved anything you tried to steal from me." Her face twisted in rage, but there was something else beneath it. A flicker of desperation. "You don't get it, do you?" Her eyes gleamed under the flashing red lights of the police car. "I was never lucky like you. I always had to fight for what I wanted. I was always the shadow of the family, the one who had to prove her own worth." For the first time, I saw the raw truth in her words, the wounded pride, the resentment built up over the years. Claudia didn't just hate me for what I had. She hated me because, to her, my existence had always been a reminder of what she could never be. But at this point, none of it mattered. "You're the one who destroyed everything, Claudia. Yourself." Her eyes flickered for a brief second, but then she laughed, a hollow, tired laugh. "I'll be back," she murmured. The police car door slammed, shut before I could reply. But there was nothing left to say. She wouldn't be back. Never again. I sighed, closing my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me all at once. My body ached, my mind pulsed with exhaustion, but I was still standing. Victory tasted like freedom. When I opened my eyes again, I saw Ricardo, running toward me. The relief on his face was almost painful to witness. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly against his chest, as if he needed to be sure that I was still there. "My God, Laura, I came as soon as I heard." My throat tightened. The warmth of his body against mine reminded me of what truly mattered. I could have lost everything. I could have died that night. But I didn't. I didn't let them take my life, my story. I pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "It's over," I whispered. But deep down, I knew. There was still something left to do. The days following the kidnapping were a mixture of chaos and silence. Journalists tried to turn everything into a scandal. Headlines spread news of Claudia and Raoul's arrests, and my family's name was dragged into the media. But the truth was clear, and the evidence was undeniable. I had nothing to hide. Claudia's trial took place a few weeks later. Sitting in the courtroom, wearing a beige prison jumpsuit that had replaced her expensive clothes, she was unrecognizable. The arrogant glint in her eyes had vanished, replaced by something darker. Raoul didn't even try to defend himself. His criminal record was already extensive, and his sentence was severe. But Claudia, she fought until the very last second. She denied, manipulated, tried to blame everyone around her, as if life had been unfair to her. But the evidence was overwhelming. The warehouse recordings, the forged documents, my detailed testimony. She had nowhere left to run. The verdict fell on her like a death sentence. 20 years in prison. Claudia screamed, thrashed, cursed at me. But in the end, she was dragged out of the courtroom as her lawyers desperately tried to calm her down. She had spent her life trying to bring me down, and now her own hatred had destroyed her. I walked out of the courthouse without looking back. My life was intact, but I knew I would never be the same. The first nights after the kidnapping were rough. I woke up to the phantom scent of rust lingering in my mind, the tight grip of the ropes still burning on my wrists, even though the marks had already faded. Ricardo stayed by my side the entire time, but he understood that a part of me needed to face it alone. The company kept running, and to my surprise, my story became an inspiration for many women in the corporate world. A woman who had faced brutal betrayal, survived, and refused to be a victim. I received invitations for interviews, speaking engagements, but I turned most of them down. I didn't want to turn my trauma into a spectacle. What I wanted was to start over. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I went back to the house where I grew up. It was a simple place, far from the grandeur of the life I had built. But there, within those walls, I remembered who I was before all of this. Before the money, before the fame, before the betrayal. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. For the first time in a long while, I felt no fear. I survived. And now it was time to live.